Hello everyone, well we're standing over my Jaguar XJ-S V12 from 1989 again. I guess this is a part 2 video on the brake ABS system. I did a previous video on the hydraulic accumulator motor side of the system, that's that unit just on that side, how it works and what to look for, etc. Yeah, this is a part 2 on the, I guess you call it the master cylinder, but it's this assembly on the same side as the driver here. This is the brake fluid reservoir, master cylinder, hydraulic booster and ABS assembly, I guess you'd ultimately call it. So yeah, this is the TEVES Mark II ABS system. It's used in lots of cars from the 1980s and 1990s. I do, as always, have the Jaguar operations manual for support. I do have some additional printouts this time. This is the manual as it comes from Jaguar. These components here, this is the front, this is the master cylinder high-level schematic essentially. That's the reservoir there, but you can see, I'll take a quick shot of it so you can have a read at slow time. It doesn't have a huge amount of detail, but the good thing about this ABS system is it was used in lots of cars, so I have managed to find this. This is from actually a German ABS manual for, I think it was a VW Golf G60, and it's a much more useful and accurate schematic of the system, and I'm going to use this as a demonstration to explain how it works. I do have another one of these assemblies on the floor of the garage because I had to replace mine, so I'm going to go over there now and we'll take a look at it outside the car. So here's the assembly as it's fitted to the car, if you like. We've got the brake pedal here. This is the brake pivot, as you're kind of looking up underneath the dashboard. This is what you'd see. This is the actuating piston that goes into the main body of the assembly just there. On the top here, these two parts are where the reservoir sits. The reservoir would be kind of here, and this direction is towards the front of the car. So here's a bit of a closer overview. These two ports on the top are where the reservoir attaches to. They aren't just feed points for fluid in this system, the fluid actually comes back up through them as well. But they're on top. This section here is the boosted portion of the system. This section here, from kind of here to the end, is the what you call the master cylinder actuator. This little lumpy bit here with the connector on the end is the main valve, part of the ABS. And finally, this square piece just here, this kind of section with the 7-way connector on the front, this is the ABS valve block. This is essentially bolted onto the side of the master cylinder to the outlet and inlet fluid ports. The brake fluid from the master cylinder goes through the valve block and out of these 3 connection points at the bottom here to the wheels. And then finally on the reverse side here you have a fitting just there, threaded fitting. That is the pressure source from the accumulator and motor. So this pipe here is, when this system is on, it's permanently filled with pressurized fluid. It shoots off over there, you can see in the center there, and it goes into the assembly just there. So just a pre-warning on this explanation, this is not the most intuitive thing to get your head around, and I am probably going to miss a few things here, but I'm going to do my best to explain it. But essentially you've got 2 parts of the system. You've got the boosted section, which is kind of this area here, and a traditional master cylinder that's actuated upon by the pedal, and also the pressure created from the boosted section. So I'll try and explain how this works. These outlets here, that's the rear brakes, that's to one side of the front brakes, and that's to another side. They've got the fluid inlets here from the reservoir, and inlets and outlets from the reservoir. And then one of these here, I think it's that blue one, is the pressure inlet from the accumulator side of the system that goes in just there. So when you press the brake pedal down, there's essentially two things that happen in this system. There is a mechanism here, you see this scissor part and this sliding valve here. The rear brakes of this system are not actuated by pressure. The pressure going to the rear brakes here is actuated purely by the mechanical movement of the pedal this way. You know, if you depress the pedal, say, I don't know, 1 centimetre, like that much, it applies a proportional pressure from the accumulator essentially directly in here through the valve, through this boosted portion and straight out there to the rear wheels. That is why when you're bleeding the ABS brakes, the TEVES ABS brakes, all you have to do to bleed the system is turn the ignition on, pressurise the system, and then hold the brake pedal at a certain depression. And with the rear bleed point open on the car, the fluid will automatically flow out of here without any pumping of brakes or anything needed. So that's effectively how the rear works. You know, this moves a physical amount. Fluid is allowed to flow into this chamber and directly to the rear brakes. So in addition to that, you have the booster part of this system, which amplifies the force applied to the front circuits. So again, how that works is you've pressed the pedal, say you're 1 centimetre depression, and you're pushed up against these two master cylinders here, one for the front left, one for the front right brakes. This boosted portion here is now pressurised with fluid from the accumulator, and what it does is it effectively pushes on all of this assembly here as effectively like a piston, and this is where your force multiplication for the front circuits comes from. You know, you're pressing on the pedal here, you're pushing against the pressure in the circuits here, and the boost force going this way is created by the hydraulic pressure in this chamber acting upon this piston mechanism here, pushing that way. So if you just think intuitively how this works, if for example you had absolutely no pressure in either your front brake circuits and you went to press the pedal in the car and your rear was functioning perfectly, the pedal would be able to be depressed all the way down and the rear brakes would still work because the pressure from the accumulator would go through the valve into this area and out to the rear brakes. So the pressure you're feeling at the pedal is essentially the hydraulic circuits to the front wheels here. I'm just looking in the manual again to see if there's any better kind of diagrams of this, but there isn't really. I know this is quite confusing to get your head around, but here's like an overview of the system. You know, we've got the reservoir here. That's the boost portion, that's the master cylinder portion, that's the ABS valve block, that's the hydraulic unit over there. The hydraulic motor assembly that we talked about, that's the ECU in there, the 4 wheels. I'm just quickly looking through here to see if there's any better diagrams. So again, here we've got the boost unit, the master cylinder and main valve, and the ABS valve block. Just going to quickly check. Here's the reservoir assembly. There is a filter on the outlet to the pump, something to be aware of. But yeah, these diagrams aren't that intuitive. I'm just going to check there's no more in here. No. So just to reiterate how this works again, if I just go to the schematic here, this is the same orientation as this is, again with the front of the car this way and the ABS valve block on the front here. So you push the pedal down, this is the pedal input, it mechanically moves through this mechanism, this sliding valve here, and essentially lets a proportion of pressurized fluid from the accumulator into this boosted chamber in proportion to the distance you've pushed the pedal down. That does two things. Firstly, it pushes fluid out of here off to the rear brakes and activates your rear brakes directly from this fluid. And secondly, it pressurizes this area, which pushes on these pistons here, which applies power assisted brakes to both of your front circuits. This is front left and front right, I think they're that way around. This is essentially, albeit with a bit of additional valving, a standard tandem master cylinder. However, unlike in a normal non-assisted car, this one outlet would go, say, to the front left and rear right brakes, and this one would go to the opposite corners. That's typically how a tandem master cylinder would be set up. In the Jag here, these go to a single circuit each, front left and front right. So this is a fundamentally reliable system, and I do have some additional documentation here to show you. This is a parts diagram of a TEVES ABS system. You can probably make out that this reservoir is actually the same shape as the one on the XJS. This valve block here with the connector, that is that. It is the same. You've got the two inlet ports to the master cylinder there, and then this is the pump assembly, accumulator, pressure switch, motor and hydraulic pump, just like you have in the XJS. This is actually from a Ferrari 355, a mid-90s model. So yeah, this system was used by Ferrari. And also this is a German document again. It's for a Volkswagen Corrado and Golf G60, I think it is. It's the mid to late 80s VW line anyway. I think it was kind of an option in Europe, this ABS system. But again, you can see this connector, this valve block, they are indeed exactly the same as the one on the Jag. There's the main valve. Here are the two inlets from the reservoir. This is a little bit different. It's got the pump, accumulator and motor kind of built in to the unit as a single item, but it's essentially the same system, just repackaged, and indeed the schematics are completely applicable across all of these systems. So you might read online a few scare stories about this system, about how there's potential that you might lose all of your braking if, say, one of your front caliper hoses were to burst due to age. I hope my explanation has kind of made it clear that actually can't happen. You've got two tandem independent circuits here on the front wheels, and effectively what is an additional independent circuit, albeit different, to the rear wheels. So if we just kind of go through this, if you say for example your one of your front caliper hoses burst, say this one, and you lost all braking to this front wheel, you would still have braking to the other front wheel, which would still be boosted, so you still have power brakes to the front wheel, and you'd also still have power brakes via the accumulator pressure to the rear wheels. If, for example, this hose were to burst, your rear wheel pressure, that would mean that there'd be no pressurized fluid in here, so you'd have no boosted functionality, but you would still have two independent brake circuits to either front wheel. So you'd still be able to stop, you just have heavy pedal pressure. So yeah, there's a lot of talk online about how fundamentally unreliable and unsafe this system is, but I think that's mainly due to lack of understanding really of exactly how it works. So back at the car, I think there are essentially two major issues with this system and why people might not like it. The first one is a lack of understanding of the fact that it is a dual tandem brake circuit on the front, not helped by this diagram in the Jaguar manual, where you can see it only indicates there's kind of one single master cylinder. I think they've done that for simplicity, but obviously that's confused things along the road. And the second one is maintenance. It's the similar story with the other side. In here there are little filters around the master cylinder bits. There are little filters in the ABS valve block. That's just there. This is all kind of quite precision stuff and much more complicated when compared with a regular master cylinder. So it's extremely essential that you change the brake fluid regularly and have nice clean brake fluid in your reservoir. If you haven't changed it and you've owned the car, say, more than a year, definitely get it changed. Buy a 5 litre bottle of quality fluid. It's quite easy to bleed it all out the back because it's done under pressure, and just flush the system through a bunch of times. Discharge and recharge the pressure accumulator to the side to get all the fluid out of there, and just make sure it remains topped up with high quality fresh fluid, because if all these filters and things get filled with junk, the system starts misbehaving. One item we haven't talked about yet is the main valve. That's this 2-pin connector just here, located on the top of the master cylinder portion. So that's the main valve just there with the connector going in the end. This is actually to do with the ABS system. What it does is, if you recall, the rear brakes are fed essentially a constant stream of pressurized fluid from the accumulator if you have the pedal depressed a certain amount. That's not the case for the front two circuits unless this valve is active. You can probably make it out, but what it does is it links the pressurized boosted section along this pipe through the valve, and then it effectively goes via this chamber here to the front circuit and along again to the front circuit via these valves and things in the middle. And that's essentially the pressure source that the ABS system uses when it's pulsing the brakes. You know, when you've got your foot pressed hard down and you're trying to stop and the ABS is active, the ABS system via the valve block in here applies and releases pressure to both of the front brake circuits rapidly, just like ABS works to control the wheel slip, and that is effectively the pressure source. So this valve activates when the ABS is active, and it basically provides this boosted fluid source, pressurized fluid source, to both of the front wheels. So that may have triggered a thought in your mind about bleeding, and yes, you're right. So when you're bleeding the rear cylinders out of the boosted section here, you obviously have to turn the ignition on, you have to charge the system, and you effectively hold the brake pedal down, open the bleed nipple at the rear of the car, and it will automatically bleed until it's done, and then you just tighten the bleed nipple and take your foot off the pedal. It put the fluid pressure pressure bleeds itself. If when you're bleeding the front brakes conventionally, if you manually activate this valve with a 12-volt source, you will actually be able to do the exact same bleeding procedure on both of the front circuits. Here we are back at the car. So this is the main valve just here, this 2-pin connection. I can't get it off, but in there's a 2-pin connection. So that's the main valve. So yeah, when you're bleeding the front brakes, if you bridge this connector in here with a 12-volt source and activate this valve, and then you go in the car, you press the pedal down slightly, just like you would bleeding the front brakes, and open one of the bleed nipples on the front, you will have a pressurized fluid stream out of the caliper, just as you do when you bleed the rear brakes. So that's a top tip if you're having difficulty bleeding the fronts, and it is possible because these filters and things, like I say, they can fill up with junk over time. However, the pressure from this system, if you use that to bleed, it can effectively push through that. And what this also means is all these little cavities in here, you can use the pressurized fluid to force all the air out, and you end up with an incredibly firm pedal. I think that's probably one of the reasons why, say, Ferrari used it with the 355, which I've never read any complaints about really, about the brake pedal feel. Because you have this pressurized source, it's possible to get a really good pedal feel with absolutely no air trapped anywhere in this system. I have one more printout to show you here. This is one of the pistons, master pistons here to one of the front circuits. This is a picture I found online. You can see here, this is the filter, and I don't know if you can make that out, but it's kind of full of junk and blocked up. That's the reason you need to do regular fluid changes, and that's the reason why utilising the main valve to bleed the front of the system is an effective thing to do when you've got this sort of issue in there. I mean, ideally you wouldn't have this, but bleeding the front circuits with the main valve and the hydraulic pressure from the accumulator can kind of help to overcome this, push fluid into places where it potentially can't get through regular bleeding. So yeah, this seal here, I think that is essentially that one just in there. You can see it's kind of a cup seal, like a traditional master cylinder. This might actually be the other way around. It might be kind of that way around. Yeah, that looks a bit better, doesn't it? But yeah, there's like a little really fine mesh gauze in there, very similar to the ones you see in the ABS valve block. And you can see it's completely blocked with junk. So make sure you change your fluid regularly. So I think that covers it. Despite the lack of detail in the Jaguar manual, it does include the procedure for bleeding the rear brakes and kind of a high level on the actuation unit renewal and things. So I think I would still recommend getting that. And yeah, this is the reservoir that obviously don't have separately. You know, you've got your level sensors in here. There's kind of 2 ports into it. This one, I think that's the one that feeds the front brakes and is a fluid return. And then you've got the other one at the back, which goes into the, I think it's the fluid return from the master cylinder section. And like I said previously, this is the pressure inlet from this pipe here that comes from the pressurized section over there. And I will do a separate video sometime in the future on the ABS side of things, the ABS valve block, because I think that deserves a separate video. But yeah, thanks for watching, and if you have any questions, let me know below, and I hope that helps. Cheerio.